8 reasons why a scientist can believe in God. And as I only have 35 minutes, that indicates for you that I only have 10 minutes for every reason. So I hope I can manage that with the 8 reasons. I think the remote control, let me see, does it work? Yeah, what I did was I included a slide first where the audience could phone a certain number. I think it's the phone number of Daniel, is it? So if you have questions, just text him, and then we can collect the questions afterwards. Okay. Yeah, I'm a scientist, and what I love about science is you see the beauty of our cosmos, the beauty of creation, and just watching the stars is great. But I'm also a German scientist, so I would like to see things differently than God has created them. That's a good German sky, you know? And I think the people in Podgorica couldn't understand that joke so well as here. I don't know why. Okay, so 8 reasons. I will skip some of the slides, so please forgive me if some things are not as well prepared as it might look like. Science is successful, and I love science. It claims to explain a lot of things on purely natural grounds only. Nature is viewed as a closed system, a self-contained system, and we can explain a lot of things like thunder, lightning, the water cycle, and so on. But if we are so successful, isn't it logical that nature is everything that there is? There's nothing beyond nature, because we can explain everything for which people needed gods in the past, for example. Well, that might be true, but let us face the consequences then, if you think like that, if you think that nature is all there is. And Nobel Prize winner Jacques Monod summarized that view in a very good book, Chance and Necessity, where he thinks very consequentially to the end. If human beings, if man accepts this message in its full significance, man must at last wake out of his millenary dream and discover his total solitude, his fundamental isolation. He must realize that, like a gypsy, he lives on the boundary of an alien world. A world that is deaf to his music and is as indifferent to his hopes as it is to his suffering or his crimes. In short, you can summarize this: you are lost. Having this perspective, if nature is everything that there is, isn't it worth at least to think about possible alternatives, about thinking whether there is another possibility than just materialism or naturalism? And to be honest, if you start thinking about that, you can't lose anything anyway, because if naturalism is true, you come from nothing, you go to nothing, and so you don't have to lose anything, nothing. In German, that pun works better. So my first question is, so if that would be true, why do scientists have different worldviews then? Here we see examples of scientists like Francis Crick, famous geneticist having received the Nobel Prize, who are atheists and who believe there is no reason to believe in God. And then we have other scientists like Francis Collins, another famous geneticist, leader of the Human Genome Project. He believes that there is a personal God. He's a Christian even. And if you look into the history of science, you find even more scientists who believed in a personal God, and most of these people were even believing Christians. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, I don't read out all of them. Arno Penzias is a Jew, by the way, as far as I know. They all have believed in a personal God, and they didn't see a problem to be good scientists, pioneers of modern science, and believing in the Christian God, in Jesus Christ. So obviously, the problem is not science versus believing in God. The problem is on a different level. It's on the level of worldviews. Different people have different worldviews. Everyone has a worldview. Also, you have a worldview. And the point is, Are you conscious that you have a worldview and that you are not neutral? No one is neutral, and it's always good to ask yourself, what do I believe about the universe, about my own existence? And when it comes to the universe, we basically have two main options in our Western world. The one option is that everything that exists comes from mind, comes from an intelligent being, from a person called God. Or the other alternative would be everything that exists comes from matter and matter only. And also minds are only produced by matter. These are the two alternatives that we have in our Western world and that you also saw are shared among scientists. What? Wrong direction. And science itself cannot prove God. I will skip that. Because if you tell me, for example, why can't we measure God? Why don't we find God in nature if God exists? Show me God in nature. I could in the same way ask you, where is Van Gogh in his painting? You will not find Van Gogh in his painting. But the painting of Van Gogh is not self-explanatory. You need a painter, and you will find traces of the painter within the painting. You will find his character, maybe his ability, his capacities, and so on. And the question is, if we look into nature, can we find traces that point beyond chance and necessity towards an intelligent cause of the universe? So no proof, but there will be traces that can be found. And the real question here, therefore, is which worldview is more plausible? Materialism on the one side or theism on the other side? And that's where we can ask and have a look into science. Get on board for a journey of plausibility together with our spaceship here. And we come to our second question. For when we start this journey, we realize that the first thing to wonder about is, why are there natural laws? Why are there laws in nature at all? Because matter is stupid. If you take a stone and try to teach the stone something, be it Romanian or English or whatever, the stone will not do anything. Why does matter conform to mathematical laws? Why is that? Even Albert Einstein wondered about that. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. That's the opposite of Socrates. Socrates said, I know that I don't know anything. And he says, we know something, but we don't know why we can know it. Why does matter conform to that? And when you look into the history of science, you find, as C.S. Lewis famously summarized, that the first scientists expected rational law in nature because they believed in a rational lawgiver. There is a rational lawgiver, and so there should be rational law in nature as well. So this was one of the motivations why people started to do science and try to discover the laws of nature. Eugen Wigner speaks of the miracle, the amazing miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulation of the laws of physics, which is a wonderful gift which we neither understand nor deserve. Maths is an object of mind. So why is something that comes from mind deeper and underlying the behavior of matter? That's a big question in science, and something that fits well with a theistic worldview, but really has some puzzles if materialism is the basic explanation for everything. Let's come to a third question. Why can we know these laws? We have now seen there are mathematical laws, but the question is, even if there are these laws, if we are a product of matter, why can we understand these laws? The geneticist Haldane formulated it like that. It seems to me immensely unlikely that mind is a mere byproduct of matter. For if my mental processes are determined wholly by the motions of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true. They may be sound chemically, but that does not make them sound logically. And hence I have no reason for supposing my brain to be composed of atoms, which is also just another idea of my brain then. In short, if materialism is true, I can always say, I believe what I believe, and I think what I think, because my atoms force me to believe that, and you believe what you believe, because your atoms force you to believe that, your neurons. It is really hard to arrive from necessity of natural laws to the freedom of thought that is necessary in order to follow logical reasoning. So we don't have a good reason to trust our thinking, but thinking and rational conclusions are the underlying cause for doing science. It's the fundament for science that we can trust our reason and we realize that it works. So the question is again, which worldview does fit better, theism or atheism, materialism? In Christianity, we believe, as this beacon of the old beacon of Harvard indicates, there is veritas, there is truth in 3 books. God's word, revelation, something that we cannot find out by ourselves, but needs to be revealed. God's work in nature, God has created nature, and God has created man and woman in his own image. So, if God created in his intelligence nature and put rational laws in here, why should man, if he and they were created in his image, not be able to understand his works in the same language, like thinking God's thoughts after him, as Kepler and Galileo said what it means to do science? In Christianity, I would say, this again is a good fit. So why can we know these laws? Because we are made in the image of the lawgiver. 4th good question. Why is there anything at all? Why is there a universe and nothing else? And the big question was, 100 years ago, even Albert Einstein and all the leading scientists believed that the universe must be eternal. There is no beginning to the universe, but the universe is all that has existed, exists, and will exist forever. But then, more and more evidence amounted that showed that the universe probably had a beginning. And so leading scientists said, like Sir Arthur Eddington wrote this in Nature. So this is not just a Christian journal or something. This is one of the leading scientific newspapers. Philosophically, the notion of a beginning of the present order of nature is repugnant. I should like to find a genuine loophole. So for an atheist, this is really strange because it opens up theological questions, again, nature. What was there before the Big Bang? The Nobel Prize winner Arno Penzias, who discovered accidentally one of the major reasons for the Big Bang and for the beginning of the universe, he says the best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. So as a theist, he has no problems with the universe having a beginning and not being self-explanatory. Because if something has a beginning, that means why did it start? What is the reason? What is the cause? What made it start? And he has an answer for that. There is a personal God, an eternal God who does not have a beginning but can cause other things to exist. But we have not only found out that the universe has a beginning, but we have also found out something very strange. Why does the universe fit so well for our existence? If we created a universe from the scratch, from point zero, what would we expect our universe to be like? Would life exist in a universe that we just start from the scratch? When we look at the universe, we find that the ratios of the fundamental constants, like the basic forces, like gravitational force, electromagnetic force, and so on, or the masses, not of human beings, the masses, but the masses of protons and electrons and so on, they are balanced to an astonishing accuracy. Just to give you one example. There is something in the universe that is called dark energy, which was discovered in about 1998, which is just 20 years ago. And they found out if you change the value of this dark energy density in the universe, which needs to be balanced with the gravitational energy density, with mass in the universe, then there will not be stars or atoms or no universe because it would have collapsed, depending in which direction you change this value. So the accuracy must be 1 to 10 to the power of 60. I wrote that down for you. If you change the value through that value, by this little amount, then there is no universe that allows for life, that allows for structures at all, interestingly. This is the most extreme fine-tuning problem known to us in physics. And the best illustration for that is, think about the whole mass of the universe, just concentrated in one point. How much can you add or subtract from that mass in order to uphold this, this amount of 1 to 10 to the power of 60? It's just one hair. It's not my hair, of course, because it's rather short, but really take a hair, just one hair, would make a difference already, whether we exist or not. Well, these are, of course, calculations, and they might change in the future, but in the moment, this is what science tells us. Paul Davies compares that to a soldier trying to hit a 1-cent coin at the other end of the universe. That's the accuracy that is necessary. And this is only one parameter. Science has found out lots of parameters, more than 100 parameters, that need to be fine-tuned within very narrow limits. And if you change them, there usually are no atoms, no molecules, or no stars, and hence no life as we know it today. It's like cracking a vault. If you want to crack a vault and get the treasure inside, all numbers must fit. If you enter a wrong number, just one number, wrongly, this won't open. There will not be life. And of course, you can interpret this also within an atheistic worldview or a materialistic worldview, which would be the multiverse. But then you also enter metaphysics, because multiverse means usually if you encounter something that is very, very fine-tuned, very accurate, then you would say this is improbable that it happens by chance, usually. So either it is designed, or if you play the lottery and win and win the jackpot because you have hit the right numbers and the additional number as well, then either 80 million people have played lottery, for example, and one time someone will win the lottery. Even the Spanish lottery sometimes is won by some people. But that means, where are all these other universes? They are not observable. It's just a postulate. And actually one of my professors, with whom I had the seminar on cosmology, he told me that, yes, I think philosophically it's just more pleasant to believe in many universes that are also natural than to suppose that there is a God or someone who fine-tunes something and is intelligent. And the other point is, the multiverse still does not get rid of the fine-tuning mechanism. It just shifts the fine-tuning mechanism from first floor, from our universe, to the mechanism that generates all these universes all the time. Because where do they come from, and why can they be fine-tuned to such a large degree in so many parameters that life is possible in this universe? So, yes, you can think differently, but I think it fits again very well with theism. A sixth question you could ask: why is life based on information? It's very interesting. When we ask an IT scientist, he would usually say, information is usually produced by minds. Well, you can doubt that when you discuss Microsoft or Apple maybe, but usually it's produced by minds. Algorithmically coded information, language and codes, is produced by a rational mind normally. If we encounter information, we are justified to conclude the existence of a rational mind. It's not an argument from the gaps, but it's a rational conclusion from our experience, actually. So when we discovered the DNA in the 50s, 70 years ago, it was called information, not by Christians, but it was called information by the scientists themselves. And Francis Crick, I have quoted him before, he's an atheist. But he also talked about hereditary information, because we find structures that are similar to letters that can be combined into words, and the words again form texts which are translated into proteins that fulfill certain functions, and again need to be fine-tuned to a certain degree. So it's amazing when you look into the basis of life. What is the basis for everything that is alive on this planet? It's information. It's not matter, at least not matter alone. Matter is the carrier of this information, but it is information. Why should there be a different cause than an intelligent sender? Only because there were no humans around at that time, because they are coded themselves in this information. Well, theism really fits with that. Atheism really needs to think about, is that really information? Isn't it just an illusion? And so on. So, having discussed the foundation of life, the next question is, why is life so purposeful? Life is so purposeful that even Francis Crick admits, biologists must constantly keep in mind, they never should forget when they work, that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Which seems like, yes, it might look as if, but it is not. Please keep that in mind. So biology clearly exhibits the impression of design, because all looks so purposeful. If you look at the wing of a bird or at the eye or something. But this impression, in his view, of this impression of design is just an illusion. That's his argument. And my question is, why? And his answer would be, because evolution is a purely natural mechanism. This is an interesting claim, because if you think about the philosophical argument, we have to ask two questions. Does biological evolution really refute God's existence? And second, is evolution a proven fact? The logic of one is, he claims, if evolution is true, there is no God, because we have discovered evolution and that's a purely naturalistic mechanism. But the question is, why could God not establish a mechanism in order to create everything? Why not? If you think about that logically, you will find out that actually, if you are an atheist, you have no other choice than evolution, which shows that atheism implies evolution, but atheism does not follow from evolution. This is just an exercise of logics, of syllogisms, actually. Atheism implies evolution, and the proof for that is easy if you look into history. If you look into the Greek philosophers, they had no evidence yet for genetics, for Darwinian evolution, and so on. But Democritus, Leucippus, and others, they believed already that everything that exists developed by itself by a process similar to evolution. So atheism implies evolution, but then evolution is not a proof for atheism, but it's a consequence of atheism. And if you go into the factory of Microsoft or Apple or Dell or IBM or wherever, and you find out that there are computers who produce other computers, which produce other computers, I should say correctly, does that mean that there is no Bill Gates and no Steve Jobs? Because the computers work very fine and produce other computers and are produced themselves by other computers and so on. No, discovering a mechanism does not show that there is no author, as also the famous teapot illustration shows. So evolution cannot disprove the existence of God. And then, of course, there is a whole discussion going on in which I won't go now, how far the scope of the mechanism evolution really works. I mean, variation in selection can be observed, so evolutionary change is real. With bacterial resistance, everyone can experience that themselves when you get sick, for example. And new species arise. Also the Darwin Finken, which are called like me, Fink, they are actually, they have risen. We have seen that. But the question is, how do purposeful building plans arise by chance? An eye, a feather. Why do we see the same construction principle used by intelligent engineers and by blind evolution? You can see that from a very simple molecule, the so-called ATP synthetase. It works similar to an electrical turbine, to a water turbine. The principle is you have a stator that is fixed in the cell membrane of the mitochondria, and you have a flux medium. In this case, it's water. In this case, it's proton. And this flux medium flows through the rotor and makes it rotate. And as the rotor rotates, some other processes take place that produce energy. It's the same idea behind both of these. And so it's no miracle that even Richard Dawkins arrives at this conclusion. Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. This molecule is designed to produce energy for the cell in form of the molecule ATP. And this turbine is designed in order to produce electrical energy for the projector to work, for example. So purpose is there. I leave away this bird. An eighth question is, are miracles possible? And I believe this is a very important question because it points us to Jesus. When I enter the room of my daughter, Caroline, sometimes my son loves to hover on the ceiling and hide himself so that I don't discover that he's spying on his sister, actually. I don't know how he does it, and physics tells me he cannot do it, but he does it every time again and again. No, actually, I can tell you later how that works. But generally, what we can say is, if there is only nature, if we are materialists, of course, there cannot be any miracles. If there is no God, there cannot be miracles. But if God exists, there is no security against miracles at all. God can intervene with his creation. So then miracles are possible. This is the most important question that we need to know. Does science exclude miracles? No, because if there is a God, then this God could interfere with nature without breaking even natural laws. Because when I have this falling to the ground, which I won't do, don't worry about that, and just let it, I can calculate the time when it hits the ground, but then I leave it loose and it falls. And then I realize, oh, it's quite expensive, and I catch it with my other hand. So my calculation was wrong. Did I violate the laws of nature there? No, I just interfered with the course of nature. I'm an agent and I can interfere with nature. I'm an additional agent introducing a new force, the force that keeps up against gravitational force, this from falling to the ground. So the question is, have miracles happened in history? And if that has happened, this is evidence for God's existence. And I'm not sure, maybe you are familiar with that argument already, are you? With Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, or who wants to hear that? Who doesn't want to hear that because you know that already? Okay, you want to hear, okay. Okay, so I'm not guilty if I overdo in time. So, one of the most interesting persons in Christian history for me is the Apostle Paul, because he persecuted the Christians, and he was very respected. He was a high-ranking academic in Jerusalem, actually, and he was even entrusted to persecute the Christians in other areas, in other Roman provinces. And so he went to Damascus, and then he encountered Jesus, as he reports himself, and he converted. He turned 180 degrees into the other direction. And he lost all his reputation. He lost his wealth. He was stoned. He traveled. He lost his home, everything. But he was happy with that. Isn't that amazing? So the question is, what was it that caused him to change so much? And he wrote in one of the eldest literature pieces that we have of Christian literature, in the first letter to the Corinthians, about dating in the 50s, AD 50 something. So about 20 years after Jesus died and was resurrected and was raised. And he writes, "And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God, because we testified about God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. Then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied, because we followed an illusion, and everything we believe is wrong. We are even wrong witnesses against God. If the dead are not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." That does not mean that Christians are not allowed to go to the pub, but they go to a pub with a different meaning of life in their mind, actually. And actually, a famous German atheist philosopher agrees with that, I would say. Jürgen Habermas wrote a very famous quotation. He said, "In view of guilt, loneliness, suffering, and death, the human condition is principally desolate." Think about what would change about this statement if Jesus really was raised from the dead. Then the sins are forgiven. He will be with us all of the days of our life. Loneliness will not be there anymore. Suffering has hope for the future because Jesus will come again back and establish justice in the new world. And death would be overcome. So all basic problems for which we don't have a solution would be solved. So what is historical evidence? What can we find that Jesus really was raised from the dead? First of all, the tomb cannot have been empty, because if the tomb cannot have been full, it must have been empty. Because if you could have found Jesus' body in the tomb, the Romans and the Jews could have taken that body and showed it to all people in Jerusalem and everywhere and show what this Christian sect that really annoys us tells you that Jesus has risen, is wrong. Here is his dead body. If robbers had stolen this dead body, they could have earned a lot of money by selling this body to the authorities at that time. So the only alternative, naturalistic alternative, would be that the disciples of Jesus took actually the body. But if the disciples took that body, what would they do? They would construct a theory or a story that would be as credible as possible. And then they go around and tell everyone, you know what? Jesus has risen from the dead. And you know, the first one who saw it were women. And everyone would start to laugh. Because women, this is, by the way, my wife on an Israel trip, rolling away the stone from the grave. It's not Mary Magdalene. In those days, women did not count as reliable witnesses. Women were viewed as unreliable. Even one man did not count as a reliable witness. You needed to have two men to have a reliable testimony about something. That was written in the law of Moses. And it was similar with the Roman law, interestingly. So why did they create a story and then say the first witnesses were women? That's really strange. Then you have the appearances of the risen Jesus, and a lot of psychologists have dealt with that. And the opinion that most of them have is that this cannot be hallucinations, because a lot of properties that are necessary for hallucinations to happen are not fulfilled with that. You can read about that, for example, in John Lennox's book. I don't go into the details now. And the main reason that I think is actually that desperate disciples become courageous witnesses without any material or political advantages. If you think about these disciples, they locked themselves up in a room. They hid themselves. They were not courageous to go out. They thought they are the next to die, actually. And their whole worldview was broken down. The whole hope was gone. What made these disciples become so courageous that they even did not look for more money, for more power? Yeah, they were even driven out of the synagogues. They were persecuted. They had to leave Jerusalem. And wherever they went, they spread the gospel. And they cared for the poor and for the weak. What can make you do that? Probably the real resurrection of Jesus would be a good explanation for that, I would say. So, we have asked 8 questions about, can a scientist believe in God? And now it's up to you. Make up your mind. All of these points are not conclusive proofs, I would admit that. You can always think from one side or from the other side, but I hope I could show you that actually these are good reasons. And there is a famous atheist philosopher called Antony Flew. He wrote together with a friend a book, There Is No God, and he crossed out the no and wrote above it a God, because in his last years, he changed his mind. And in this book, you can read why. First, he explains on the first 80 pages why he was an atheist. And then he turns the point round and shows you why he is not anymore. I now believe that the universe was brought into existence by an infinite intelligence. Why? This is the world picture as I see it, that has emerged from modern science. First, the fact that nature obeys laws. We talked about that. It persuaded him. Second, the dimension of life, of intelligently organized and purpose-driven beings. We've talked about that. Third, the very existence of nature, of the universe. We must follow the argument wherever it leads. He did not become a Christian because he did not like the notion of revelation, that God could communicate with us, while I would say, why should God not be able to communicate with us? But he believed in a personal creator in his last years. Remember Jacques Monod. This is what naturalism tells you. A world that is deaf to our music, to our hopes, to our sufferings and crimes. There is no hope. You are lost. In the biblical worldview, in the Old Testament, and even more in the New Testament, God communicates with us, the mind that has created all that, who has left his traces in nature. He tells you personally, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I've drawn you with unfailing kindness, in the book of Jeremiah. So we are the beloved vis-a-vis of the Creator. There is meaning in life. We are a jigsaw puzzle in God's master plan. My children loved to make jigsaw puzzles and they still love it. And if one piece is missing, there is really something missing. But everything fits to each other and every piece is unique. And that's so for a purpose, because there is a bigger picture and you can be part of that picture if there is this God who intended you to be there. So let yourself be built into this master building of God that is slowly building up, as I made my decision. But that's up to you, really. Make up your mind. If you have questions, Daniel is happy to answer them. Thank you very much.